Hey guys, welcome to Elite Hunters. This is a live stream. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, but recently I was watching a video made by Mitchell, White Sox fan card collector, and I was just how would you say he moved me because I felt like we were kindred spirits. And he delved into a player with their war and their accomplishments, and I basically saw a little of myself in Mitchell, and I reached out to him and we connected, and now I'm gonna have him on because I felt like we both were baseball historians with the similarities in the way we like to present our pickups and our players. So hey, we got Mitchell. How you doing, Mitchell?
Good evening.
Thank you
How you
for
doing,
joining.
James? This should be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Even in preparation for this show, I think we talked for hours just about
yes, we
our
did.
ways we collect. So
We
should be good
spent a
time.
few hours definitely. Well, I want to know, and I'm pretty sure some of the viewers want to know, how did you get into this whole way of like becoming a baseball historian? When did this happen?
It really got instilled in me when I was very young, honestly. Kind of even going back to like when I was in grade school. Some of it was, I went to baseball games at Wrigley Field and Comiskey Park. So like the old Comiskey Park. So these were like historic stadiums that had smells and sounds that kind of beckoned from years past. And fans that littered the aisles that remember watching teams going all the way back to the 30s and 40s when I was there. And they would, you know, obviously be very friendly to the young kids that were there, including myself, but talk about like these great players from yesteryear and things like that. So some of it was just kind of getting wrapped up in that environment at an early age and just kind of really starting to learn more about the game and also starting to card collect right around that time. So and around that time, like in '86, I started getting like this giveaway. It was actually something they gave away at Comiskey Park. It's what I use as my background
Right.
in my videos, and it ends with 1986 tops in the back here, but it has every tops card of a White Sox player going all the way back to, I believe it picks up at 1951, if I'm not mistaken, where you have cards in here. So, 52 actually was the very first one where you have the cards listed in there and has the pictures of every single White Sox player in here that was featured on a tops card that year, going back like just full 59, which is kind of a good year for the Sox. And I was just kind of intrigued, like learning more about these players. I'm like, who are these guys? These cards look cool. And it's like, oh, I want to get more cards. I want to get some of these cards, kind of looking back at this one. And I'm like, oh, I want to get cards from the 70s. I want to get cards from the 60s. I want to get cards from the 50s. And so this book has been with me ever since then. I actually have two copies of it. I have the one my dad got that season too. We went to the baseball game. And I guess they did them for like every team that year. So I guess you can find it for any team that obviously was a team that season. You can find a similar thing for them. And it's really cool just kind of having that.
Yeah, I
Um,
actually have the Yankees version. So
okay. Yeah.
one
So,
thing we have in common.
and then I'm sure some people have seen this too in the background, and some people probably have it. This is something I got too when I was a kid too. My parents bought this for me. It was a book by Bert Sugar who had like Hall of Fame cards in there. It has baseball cards going back like to the T206s, the Tattoo Orbits, and things like that. Going through like the 1960s, I think is like the earliest card that they have kind of in here, the oldest card, I should say, well, earliest card actually. So it goes all the way back to there, and this is when I first saw like play balls and gout and Diamond Stars, Goudies, and things like that. And I didn't know who like any of these players were, except for like the big names like Ruth and DiMaggio and stuff like that. But yeah, I was like 9 or something like that, so I was just intrigued and wanting to learn more about those players. And I think if you remember, the top sets also had those turn back the clock cards starting, I think, in '86 too, where they kind of talked about a player from like the 50s or 60s, depending on what cards they kind of selected. So I was starting to learn more about players at that time. So uh, yeah, because that's when it really started at a very young age. And as I kind of went into high school, I started doing like whenever I could in grade school and high school, I would do book reports on baseball players or basketball players, and I would go to the library and try and find something that might be interesting. And this was like one that I did in grade school. I did this book written by Lou Gehrig's widow about their relationship and his time in baseball. So I did like some paper on Lou Gehrig at some point. I can't remember if it was like grade school or high school. So like I said, it started at an early age and just carried on into college. So I had like a couple other books here that I kind of keep my spirit going throughout the years. I read The Glory of Their Times back in college. And I got it for free at a book sale at a library. I think I paid like $1 for it. And I think this might be even a first edition copy of it. So it's pretty cool. It's just kind of obviously like having these books that are well worn, but like have all these cool photographs in there of players who played at the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. So yeah, so that's really kind of started for me. And then the cards were always like my attempt to have like a piece of this player, if it made sense. I mean, not literally, but like something that kind of is connected to the player and during the era in which they played.
So, have you always been into history, or was it just your love of baseball that got you to reading all these books?
Yeah, I think I enjoy history just in general, but definitely more sports history, and baseball history probably predominantly has been where I've spent most of my time reading books throughout the years about baseball players and things in baseball history. Like I could have pulled like all kinds of different books that kind of talk about that too. But the one where I really got into Hall of Fame players was this Cooperstown book they got in like for Christmas in like 2002. So it had like every Hall
Nice.
of Fame player and has like a little bio in there about the player and things like that. So people are learning about these guys that I didn't know anything about. And it was really kind of cool starting to learn about these players from like the Negro Leagues, the turn of the century, from the 1890s. And that's where I think my like knowledge and my ability to be able to kind of talk the game really greatly improved. So I was able to kind of cross eras. And then at this point, as I started learning more about it, and obviously this is when like you could go on the internet and look up cards about these players too. So it was like right at the perfect time for me to kind of like, try to find cardboard that kind of goes with these guys, and could never afford it. I still
Yeah.
can't for most of them, but
Or
yeah.
find it for that matter, right?
Yeah,
Because
depending on what player it is, for sure. Especially like anyone who played in the Negro Leagues, right? It's hard to find like
right.
anything kind of tied to them that's not a relic card. So
But if you were reading those books back in the 80s, early 90s, like eBay wasn't prevalent then. So going to your local card shop, you wasn't going to find any of these 1900 cards so readily available.
no. Yeah, it was all like the current stuff at the card stores there. So typically.
Right.
Which was still a fun experience then, but
Hodges thinks that's a cool book. Cooperstown looks sweet. And
yeah, it is.
Don actually said the audio version of Glory of Their Times is a must listen. So,
There's also a YouTube video from the TV series that they did on it from like the early 70s that you can
mhm.
scroll and you can actually watch it, and it has like the interviews in there too. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
So, at what point did you start to? I guess the books were the foundation. At what point did the cards get incorporated in your 20s, 30s? Like, at what point?
They were kind of always there. I just couldn't really afford vintage cards. Like every now and then I would get one as a gift from my family. Like I think the oldest card I was given as a gift was a 58 Kurt Flood, because my
Okay.
dad wanted me to learn about the struggles of Kurt Flood fighting for free agency and how he was blackballed by baseball thereafter. So that was kind of like also like getting encouraged to learn about these players from like my father. Um, and then he gave me like a Brooks Robinson card too, because we had like he had a connection to somebody that worked for Brooks Robinson, so I was gotten some autographs. So I got to learn about Brooks Robinson at an early age too. I think the oldest card I bought when I was a kid was a 71 Topps Brooks Robinson at a card show or a card shop that was a couple towns over. It no longer exists here. Like I said, I was just always kind of gravitated towards like some of these older ones and some of the few players that I knew from those eras at that moment. I wanted to accumulate more knowledge and get to know the players more. And I think by the time I got to my early 20s, I was like all in with trying to be able to build sets. So then I wanted to start building like with vintage sets and kind of start going as far as I could at that point. So then I started with the 1973 top set. I think back in 2004, I think is when I finished that set. I think I started in 03 and finished it in 2004. Then I've
Okay.
kind of been doing it ever since with a little bit of a break at the beginning of last decade.
That's cool. So I see that in your channel you like to do set builds. You even do with RJ, you look into sets and you compare the cards that you have for the sets, and then you like to do the Diamond Star set predominantly,
Mm-hmm.
and showcase the players, and then you also do the player spotlights. Which is your favorite?
Oh, my favorite video to put together is the Diamond Star ones by
The
far.
Diamond Stars?
Yeah, because I just love enjoying learning about each and every player in that set. Obviously these are Depression era players, so yeah, they made good money in comparison to the average American, but it was a pretty hard life. And once their career was over, they were no better off really than anybody else, unless they were a superstar. And so their lives took different turns. Some of them were able to end up finding ways of being successful after their careers, whereas others kind of continued to struggle after their career for the rest of their lives. And I think also why I like those cards in particular is those stories have been written. So you can know the beginning all the way to the ending of these players. And so I think that's kind of cool, as you can tell the entire life of this individual. Whereas like with modern cards, like that's still kind of more recently as players, you're like their careers are not over, or you don't know what they're going to do post career. And I think those stories are also more easily obtainable and easily known. You don't have to go into books and things like that to find some information on some of these players.
Right.
So the internet's obviously made it much easier to be able to get information, and Saber is a good resource, great resource even for the histories of some of these players. Yeah.
Right. And then so you get into player spotlights, but you do a great job with that. You must love reading about their what they did, their accomplishments, and then
Mm-hmm.
you also break it down with awards. Tell me about getting into some of these players and why you choose to spotlight some of these players.
Yeah, actually, like some of it kind of even goes back again to like the early 2000s when I started having like access to eBay and saw that some of these vintage cards were going to be like as expensive as the old Beckett's would say they would be, or even kind of going to the card shows in the 90s where everybody followed the Beckett guide. And I started reading about like a lot of the history around the 1919 White Sox. And only thing I kind of knew was Eight Men Out. I had read that book before and had watched the movie. Um, and obviously knew the sort of story of Shoeless Joe Jackson, or at least at that point, more of the legend of Shoeless Joe Jackson, less about the man at that point. And, one of the names that kind of kept coming up a lot in those books was Hal Chase. And talking about just a player that was very much a man of his time, in that, he would do anything for a buck. They didn't make a lot of money playing this game. And yeah, it was more than, again, than the average American. But, there was opportunities to make a little bit of money on the side where you got into showbiz in some ways, vaudeville or something like that. But some of the guys just try to make money within the sport, like by betting each other during the games. So like Hal Chase's name came up quite a bit, not only just in the investigation of like the 1919 White Sox, because he allegedly had knowledge of the fix because he was very in the league with gamblers at that point. But also because he had like a tarnished legacy at that point of throwing baseball games. So it was pretty well known that he would potentially kind of lay down to maybe make a few bucks during a game, and sometimes encouraged his teams to do that, especially even when he was the manager of the Highlanders for a brief period of time in New York. He during his time though, he was kind of like known as like the best defensive first baseman in the American League, and maybe the best first baseman in the American League. But just through some of these periods of like, you could say now dishonesty, but so many players were doing things like he did at that time. But he just kind of like, he and a few others really got the ear of the commissioners or the league presidents, and eventually the commissioner. as like bad seeds in the game. And honestly, rightfully so for Hal Chase, but some of the other guys maybe were kind of thrown in there with the 1919 White Sox and have paid a heavy price, in their legacies thereafter. But when I was reading about Hal Chase, I wanted to like see if I can get a card, like of Hal Chase and kind of like have that connection to the player. And I've talked about him on the channel too. It was one of the first videos I did using this T206 card that was picked up back in like 2001 or something like that. So, and there you have the, I think the earlier version of that card. This is the 350 subject back on it. So it's like the last part of the T206 series. And they moved it to a blue background. But
yeah, so we're Hal Chase brothers. This is supposedly the pink version, the rarer version. I personally like the connection with Hal Chase was because of Heine Zimmerman, and those who followed my Triple Crown series know I did a spotlight on Heine Zimmerman, and these two guys are linked together. And the reason why was they thought that Heine Zimmerman was helping spread the money around, and how Chase was telling him where to go to and who to try to get on board to throw games. And they never could prove it, but they held this Triple Crown, I guess, hostage, even past when he died in 1969. And after he died, they wanted to, I guess, bring it up again and see if it was indeed true that, he was involved. And then after that, when they, I guess, researched enough and saw that it was clean, then they said, all right, wait a minute. What about his Triple Crown then? Was he being blackballed? So then eventually, after much research, he was eventually found to indeed have 4 extra RBIs that was washed away. And they put it back on the scoreboard on his stat sheet, and he became a Triple Crown winner in 2015. And it's all because his involvement with Hal Chase. So I always like them both together.
Yeah, I mean, like he also this is kind of funny too. Is like when he briefly played for the Reds, he won a batting title with them, but during like the 1918 season, he was more or less let go and banned by his manager at the time, who was Christy Mathewson. That was kind of interesting. Like, oh, there's a tie to another big name of that era too. So he had his hand in everything at that point.
Right. So you would like to follow mainly your White Sox old time guys?
That and the St. Louis Cardinals. My dad was a big St. Louis, or is still alive, and a big St. Louis Cardinal fan to this day. And that's his team. And, I think I share a lot of that love for the Cardinals with him. But it was hard watching the Cardinals up here, and live at least, because it was either once a couple of years at Wrigley Field, whereas I could go to the White Sox games as much as I kind of wanted at that point, because the games were pretty cheap even up through about the early 2000s. So.
Yeah, Mike Petty says there's a podcast out with Hal Chase, Crime in Sports, on Apple Podcasts. So I definitely need to check that out. And so does Hugo. He thinks he has to go check that out too. So who else have you done spotlights in that you probably picked up their card, it gave you a reason to, or maybe when you researched them, it made you want to chase the card?
Well, I'm going to do like a couple card show pickups recently too. And so this one I picked up last January at a card show, local card show. It was just sitting in a like a display case with a bunch of modern cards, and it was ungraded at the time. I could tell the guy just kind of wanted to move it because it wasn't really his forte. And it was the Fred Parent card from the T206 set in a White Sox uniform. So it was kind of a bonus for me, right? I submitted it for grading over the summer. Pleased that it came back as a 3. But what I do with a lot of these cards, if I don't know the player, I go home immediately and I start wanting to learn about the player, learn about the person too. And so like Fred Parent, some interesting things about him that make him kind of unique in baseball history is he was part of the 1903 World Series. He was with the Red Sox at that time. He was known as a pretty good all-around player, decent hitter, good fielder, ran the bases exceptionally well, was a starter for the team with the Red Sox during that time. I think they had a different name, I believe. I forgot what they were. Blanking on it right now. Was it the
Americans?
Just the Boston Americans, or I can't remember when they were the were there also the Bean Eaters or something, or like confusing the
They were
brand?
the Bean Eaters, but then when they
Yeah.
started up the American League, they were the Boston Americans.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so they were just the Americans, right? And they played against Pittsburgh at that point, and won the World Series. But anyway, so like years later, he got moved over to the White Sox, and then finished his career playing for Chicago. When he was ending his major league career, he was sold to Baltimore, who was a minor league team at that time. And shortly thereafter, a young guy named George Herman Ruth decided to sign with Baltimore. He was a local kid to that area, and Fred Parent was kind of a big part of like coaching him at that time, and also contacted his former club, Boston, and said, "Hey, you need to take a look at this guy." And then he helped be able to negotiate Babe Ruth signing with the Boston Red Sox at that time. So that's one thing that kind of makes him unique. And the second one is that he was, at the time of his death, he was the oldest living member of the initial World Series. And he died, I think, in 1972. He was born in 1875, so he lived to be 96, which is kind of a crazy old age given the era that he lived in and played.
Wow. And who else? Who, you say you had a couple cards. Let's see the other guys you got there.
Yeah, this one's kind of fun. I thought so. They're this same card show, not the same date, but same one. They do it every month. This guy had a bunch of Gaudies just kind of sitting on his table, and they're ungraded. And I'm like, well, I'll take those. Would you do like, you know, I think I got him like $8 a card. And one of them was Sam Bird. And, you know, I think this might, some people might know the history of Sam Bird, but Sam Bird, when he was a baseball player, he played predominantly with the New York Yankees. He was a backup outfielder, often was used as a defensive replacement or a base running replacement for Babe Ruth. And when Babe Ruth would sit out games, he typically would take his place in the outfield. So that was about the extent of his baseball career. He didn't have like a very like huge, lengthy baseball career. And at the age of 28, he decided to retire because he wanted to try a different sport professionally. Apparently, Sam Bird was an exceptionally gifted golfer. In fact, even the back of his Gaudi card talks about that he's probably, I think it says the line is something along the lines, one of the best golfers in professional baseball is the first thing listed on his baseball card. So it doesn't talk about him being a baseball player first and foremost. It talks about him being a golfer. Well, he is the only person to have played in a World Series and played in the Masters.
Oh, wow.
So he was a really good golfer, right? He finished second in the PGA Championship once and was third and fourth in the Masters. And actually ended up playing on the senior circuit too, the senior PGA circuit, and won his last tournament in 1967. So like, you know, he's in the World Series in the like 1930s. I think 32 was the year he was on a winner. 1932 World Series, and then he was winning a golf tournament in 1967. So like, that's pretty cool. And I just kind of like knowing like this dual sport guy who's probably kind of lost to history in some ways, right? You don't really think of him as like one of the great dual sport athletes like a Jim Thorpe or a Bo Jackson, right?
Bo Jackson or Deion Sanders. Wow. You got a couple more there?
Yeah. Actually, this is kind of getting back to the Diamond Stars set a little bit too. So, you know, part of what attracted me to that set is just the Art Deco, and a lot of these books I was reading, as you can tell, like have you kind of tie back to like the 1930s and 1920s and 40s. And I think that's the era I really kind of like reading about and learning about, is that era pretty much up until about the mid 50s. And I don't know why I've always been gravitated towards it, but I just kind of have. Those are the players I like learning about. And I love Art Deco stuff. So, like in Chicago during this time in 1933, we had the World's Fair, and like the big images that kind of went with it kind of fit also our architecture in the city. And we had a lot of Art Deco buildings throughout the city in this era, and many of them still exist to this day. So for some reason, it kind of just reminds me of like Chicago, this set in some ways, and the way it's kind of designed. And I think that was part of the reason I kind of got gravitated towards it, just the Art Deco emphasis. So anyway, so the reason I've kind of been building that set is partially influenced because of that era. And so recently I was picked up the Wes Ferrell card. So
nice.
Wes Ferrell, I'm trying to complete the entire set. So at some point I need to pick up this card. And I knew I wanted to get this one after I'd gotten his brother. His brother, Rick Farrell's in the Hall of Fame. And I usually do player spotlights one at a time, but sometimes I do 2 players at a time. And this one I thought had to be done together. So like I also went out and got the 37 Gaudy wide pen that has a picture of both of them there when they were with the Boston Red Sox. So Wes Ferrell is a guy who has a WAR of 60. I think if I pull up the page here, it's like just a little bit over 60. 60.1. So that's exactly just a little over there. But this guy, like, I don't know how many people like remember him, unless you're like a fan of Cleveland or Boston, where he's in their Hall of Fame. But he's otherwise kind of lost to history in some ways. People don't really remember him, but he was a 6-time 20-game winner. And he was a multiple All-Star during his era, including being on All-Star teams with his brother when they were with the Red Sox during that era. What's kind of interesting about him is he did throw a no-hitter, but like what's interesting about him is something that he and his brother are tied to that probably will never be replicated. And maybe it could, but no, it probably won't be anymore. And I'll explain why in a minute. So there's been multi games in which brothers have home run, right? And they both played against each other or been on the same team. I think even last year we had 2 brothers on the same team homer, right? But in baseball history, there's only been 1 game where a brother hit a home run as a pitcher, and then later gave up a home run to his brother as a catcher. They were on opposite teams when it happened, and it's the only time it's ever happened. And I don't think it'll ever be repeated because the pitchers don't bat anymore unless your name is Shohei Ohtani. So unless Ohtani's got a really talented brother that's going to be a major league player at some point, I don't see that ever being repeated. So I think that was what kind of makes them really unique, obviously in baseball history. It's an oddity, but they're both excellent players. Wes Ferrell was a better player than his brother, but he had a huge temper that kind of carried in beyond his career. When he was in a minor league manager, he'd often get in like actual fights, not just arguments, but fights with the umpires at that time. So I think part of the reason Wes is not considered for the Hall of Fame is due in part to his temper. But during his era, I mean, obviously winning 20 games 60 times is good, but he was also known as the kind of the best hitting pitcher of his era, aside from obviously I think Babe Ruth hadn't been hitting anymore, or pitching anymore, I should say, during the 30s. So like Wes Ferrell was kind of the best hitting pitcher of his era. He had, at least at the plate, he batted .280, hit 38 home runs, and drove in over 200 runs in his career. That's pretty damn good. So
Hugo said someone made a VR for Hodges that said Wes hit more homers than Rick.
He might have. I don't know. I don't have Rick's numbers right in front of me, but it's very possible. And he was a much better player than his brother was.
Now that you showed Wes Ferrell's card up close, I don't have that card, but I'm noticing that it's the same image of his worldwide gum, except is in the Art Deco form, and mine is the black and white.
Is that the Boston cap or is that the Cleveland cap?
Cleveland, and he's got the same smirk. That's how I noticed this. And the line in the background. We need Hugo to crack the case. Where are they in this picture? Wow, so that's cool. I learned something. They're both the same image now. And is that the last one that you're spotlighting for now?
No, I think we were going to try and like touch a little bit on war too, and like how that's helped us kind of like understand, like doing a little bit of revisionist history and learning like how good some players were during their eras. That before we had that information, we just they were kind of like, why is that person in the Hall of Fame? Why is that person considered good? And this next player, I think, kind of is a good example of that. And it was one I did a little research on when I was picking up his card. At the time, I was trying to get some Hall of Fame players that played in St. Louis, including also the St. Louis Browns. And Bobby Wallace was somebody who played for both sides of town and was a Hall of Fame member. He's actually on the Walk of Fame that's outside of the Cardinal Stadium currently, too, along with George Sisler. I think they might be the only 2 Browns that are on there, if I'm not mistaken. But Bobby Wallace, like, how many people, like, just in the comments, like, have ever heard the name Bobby Wallace?
Man,
Probably think
he's
he's a NASCAR driver or something,
no.
right? Yeah. So, but so here's a player that you look at his hitting stats, and I think that's what we tend to look at, right? And he probably doesn't really stand out. Yeah, he had 2,300 hits, which is good. He played from 1894 to 1918, so he had a pretty long career. But his average was 268. Drove in 1,100 runs, so he was kind of productive. But he also played kind of a long time. I'm
Mhm.
not surprised that Vintage Oddball Cards has heard about Bobby Wallace. In fact, he probably has about 5 Bobby Wallace cards in his collection somewhere.
No,
Probably
I
all PSA 5s or higher.
think he played catch with Bobby Wallace.
You might have played catch with Bobby Wallace, right?
Yeah.
Um, but through war, so Bobby Wallace had the reputation of being the best shortstop in the American League during his era.
Mhm.
And maybe the best shortstop in the game at his era until Hannes Wagner kind of took that reputation over from him. So like, well, how do we can tell that now? And through when we look back at it is through war. His 926 fielding percentage, which doesn't sound high by today's standards, is excellent when you're kind of thinking about the era he played during the dead ball era when these were not manicured fields. The balls were super like soft at times and just full of tobacco juice and all other kinds of things have been spit on there. And um, so like that is an exceptionally high fielding percentage for this player, which bumped up his war higher, kind of in the same way that Wes Ferrell's war was kind of bumped up higher because of what he did at the plate. So WAR, I think, takes into account the entirety of the player, and you just don't look at like their primary batting or pitching stats. So what I'm going to show you now is actually a Bobby Wallace card. It's actually a Mecca double folder. I'm sure some people have familiarity with these already, but they're like the Topps double headers, where you have the image on one side and you have on the other side the other image you're supposed to fold over to create the next image of the player. Well, the back is actually Bobby Wallace here, and the card has like a little bit of stats for both of these players. But this is the 1911 Mecca double folder, which came with cigarettes at that time. So this is one I picked up probably about 3 or 4 years ago when I was getting those cards, and that's when I did a deep dive into Bobby Wallace, kind of learning more about him. And he actually managed a little bit too during his career while he was also a player, but then many years later in the 30s with the Reds in 1937. So I get really energized like learning about these things. As you can tell, I'm pretty animated at the moment. So, but
So
that's what I feel when I'm like learning about these things. Like I'll be sitting at my desk, like reading about a card I picked up, and I'll just like make sounds. My wife will pop in here and say, "Are you okay?" I'm like, yeah, this guy did this. Did you know that? She's like, I don't know who he is, but that sounds nice.
right. Orlando shares your sentiments, and Rick is saying he was
That's
an
right. He was a good pitcher too.
actor,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
then Jason is saying, Rick, did he play when you were in college? So everyone's getting after Rick now.
Oh,
Um,
poor Rick.
all right, so war is a stat that a lot of people like sometimes don't even want to bother with it because it's just something that it's a tool used to measure athletes, especially from different eras. And like you said, it incorporates their defense where you're not just looking at their offensive stats, and you could maybe crisscross pitchers and hitters and see their importance amongst each other. So I found that so cool that you used to refer to it and point to it because I do the same thing. How else are you going to be able to judge players from the pre-war era and then the modern era and estimate their greatness compared to each other? Like Barry Bonds hitting, so many home runs in '01 compared to Ty Cobb, his greatness. And sometimes war helps you kind of understand their
Yeah,
greatness a
Hugh
little
Duffy batting like 455 or something like that. Like, come on.
bit. Right. And then I actually have a list that I was trying to break down. Do you want to check out the list
Let's
of
do it.
people's? Let me see. So here I have like from Baseball Reference, all the war leaders. And then let me see. This is single season, and it breaks down the modern era. Babe Ruth as the top guy per season, 14.1 in 1923. And then it just goes down the line. You see Carl Yastrzemski with his Triple Crown years right up there. And these are just hitters, it looks like, not pitchers incorporated. But then you have like other ones where it has their all time, right? This is all time. And then this one, I was just showing Bobby Wallace. He's 76 right there.
Mm-hmm.
He's right next to Ozzie Smith, another defensive guru.
Yeah,
So
I think
it's
you have
only
to share
fitting.
that screen if you can, but
Oh, it's not up there?
yeah, we still see the single season ones.
Oh,
Yeah.
not bad.
But he's like a good example where in the calculated war, it's like his profile elevated because they're like, oh wow, he's like fits in with these players. Huh. So
Okay,
it
so
kind of
now do
made
you
people
see it?
like do a double take on a player like that from that era.
So
Yeah,
you
we
see
got it now.
Bobby Wallace
Yeah.
now with
Mm-hmm.
Ozzie Smith? And so it's only fitting that both are defensive gurus right next to each other. But on,
And Cardinals. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. But over here, we got the pitchers incorporated for all time stats. And you see Babe Ruth, one of the greatest hitters ever, and Walter Johnson, they're one of the greatest pitchers ever, neck and neck. So you can quantify how great they were, even though they were, one was a hitter, one was a pitcher. And then Cy Young right underneath, next to Barry Bonds, the masher on steroids. And then you got Willie Mays, and then Ty Cobb. So they just mashed together all the eras, which I think is so cool because, how else can you compare dead ball era player to a modern era player? It's almost impossible.
That's the best way to do it, I think, so far.
Yeah, so that's why I love war. I was impressed that you referred to it a lot. Sometimes I've had conversations with Mike Moynihan, and he made up his own list with war per at bat, and it changed things up, and I thought that was interesting. Here you have Hank Aaron and Tris Speaker next to each other, and sandwiched with Roger Clemens, which is so cool. Hannes
Yeah.
Wagner, Stan Musial, and they're all together. I love looking at this stuff. And then in single season, this doesn't have the picture though. I wanted to show Shohei where he ranks, being that he pitched and hit in his recent MVP. But this is only hitters. I don't have this one up.
Oh, that's odd. They don't have him incorporated somehow. So
Yeah,
he can't even make the list. So.
right, right. So I just think it's cool that it's a tool that we get to use and have fun with and debate over. And you used it too, which is one of the reasons why I was so enthused to have you on, because your historian ways and everything. And I was like, he's a nerd like me.
Makes for interesting arguments, right? And I remember having a discussion with my good friend who also collects, and we were having an argument about who is the better hitter, Albert Pujols or Mike Trout. And I was like, you're kidding me, right? It's not even close. And like he pulls up the wars. I'm like, oh, I guess Mike Trout's a lot closer to Albert than I thought he would be. But Albert dominated for 10 years. But I guess it not as much as I thought. But it was also during the steroid era to some degree too. So how much more war would he had if everybody was playing on a level playing field? We'll never know, obviously, but it brings up some of those conversations.
Well, that reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you. So you're a White Sox fan and you research a lot of the Black Sox players.
Mm-hmm.
And then you notice how they got blackballed, and then steroid users are being blackballed. And then Pete Rose, who gambled, back to the Black Sox scandal, he was shunned from the Hall of Fame. Do you think they should all be lumped in together in one big pot, like cheaters, gamblers, and people who threw games all together with steroid users?
This is a fantastic question, actually. So I have a little bit of problem with the person that leveled the judgment against the Black Sox and some of those early players that were thrown out of baseball, Hal Chase being one of them. The integrity of the games matters. I'm not opposed to having a penalty, applied to the Black Sox and anybody else that was involved with it. Don't have a problem with it. I have a problem with his inconsistency with it, because not too much later, he was dealing with a very serious dilemma. Do I have to like ban Tris Speaker and Ty Cobb for gambling within the game? I have enough information to suggest that it may have happened, but I just can't do it. There was just too much of a scar in the game from the 1919 White Sox. So, there was some inconsistency there. I had a problem with that, and I had a problem also with, this is the guy that like really stopped integration from happening much earlier. So this guy was not like, of like a higher ethical calling in some ways. So like, not to completely invalidate his rulings, but like some of his judgments when like, Bill Veeck was trying to, integrate his team much earlier when he, I think he was involved with the Reds at that time, and they didn't want him to be an owner with them. And if he was going to try and integrate with the team, and now that was coming from the league presidents, other owners, but Landis was the one that was backing it all together because he went to Landis a few times to try and get this to happen. So like, I have a problem with that in some ways, right? So this guy isn't like the moral authority that he kind of like was portrayed to be during his era of what was right and wrong in baseball. So I feel like those guys, like their bans ended, there were lifetime bans. When their lifetime ended, they should be considered for the Hall of Fame. I know that's the writers that are doing it. It's not the Hall of Fame that's doing it. In fact, Hal Chase even got votes during the very first Hall of Fame voting to decided like, well, people that are on the ban list, we don't want to like have them included. So then he got dropped off the next year, and then any other player has been banned since then. Pete, I feel is a little bit of a different case because it's very clear what the penalties were by the time he was doing it. And he continued to do it. And I definitely have like empathy for him because he had a very, problems with addiction and gambling, clearly. But he hadn't done himself any favors. And, I think baseball probably should try and like wrap their arm around him a little bit more and try to like really support him through this. I think it would be a nice thing if they actually did allow him to be voted into the Hall of Fame. And I know that I think he served his time, and obviously his legacy has been tarnished, and that's not going to go away. But I think everyone still feels like he was a deserving of a player to be in there. So I feel like there maybe those individuals might be a little bit different. But throwing a game, that did need to be taken care of because integrity mattered. People made so much money, like knowing inside betting on that, and it was so rampant in sports in that era that they needed to clean it up, for sure. So wasn't a problem with that. The steroid era, and stop me if I'm talking too much here.
No, it's good. It's good.
The steroid era, man, these were the guys I loved. This was when I was like coming of age in like the 90s up to the 2000s, and I just like loved these players. I was totally wrapped up in like the career stats these guys were getting, Palmeiro, Bonds, Clemens, and I just was always like citing it against history and like, this guy's one of the best players of all time. Just look at their stats of this. No one's done this or that. I was rooting for Bonds to be able to break the single season home run record. I was rooting for him to be able to kind of break the home run record. But then like you started hearing the stories, right, with the Balco investigation, Ken Caminiti kind of talking about steroids in baseball. And I just thought maybe I was giving them the benefit of the doubt if they said they didn't use, because I wanted to believe that they weren't using, and I wanted to believe that there was integrity in sport. And some of that was my innocence just as a person, not thinking that somebody would be so dishonest in some ways. But I guess it's not even like so much dishonesty now. I was trying to be competitive with other people that were doing the same thing because there's no penalties against it. So I guess in some ways, since baseball has had set standards for for steroid use, the players that got caught after that, Manny, sorry, Alex, sorry, Robinson Cano, sorry. Like you guys knew what the rules were and you broke them. They're testing you now. Before then, like I want to show them a little bit of grace. I guess we should kind of include them in there. And that's me kind of coming a 180 around on this thing because there was a period of time where I just stopped watching baseball because like my heart was a little bit broken. I felt like it was all fake. And in like the late like 2008, 9 to like 10, 11, 12, I kind of stopped kind of watching and collecting. I got more into the Premier League soccer, and still love the Premier League and I watch it all the time now too. But I slowly came back to baseball. It took me a little while to kind of like make peace with it because it was such a part of who I was as a fan. But I felt really hurt, by that. Like not that it did anything personally to me, but I felt hurt as a fan, like feeling I was deceived in some way. And these people that I championed were not doing it on the same level. And my final thought on it is like I just think about like kind of going back to war. Like thinking of the guys that we have no worries or suspicions that used Frank Thomas, Ken Griffey Jr., some of those Chipper Jones. Some of their war would have been higher if they had used, right? They probably would have had these gargantuan numbers as well, but they didn't. But these other players that had higher wins above replacement at the same position they played during those seasons are known to have used. So this era, war doesn't work so well because we had these guys that were chemically enhanced versus those that weren't. They weren't playing the same set of circumstances.
Well,
So
war can't measure.
Right era, so
Yeah, war can't measure integrity, unfortunately, and it's just a shame because as a Yankee fan, I used to go to bat for Derek Jeter all the time over people like Garcia Parra, A-Rod, and he's Mr. Intangible. And then you come to find out A-Rod was doing steroids. And it's like, there had to be a way, he was so damn great. And Derek Jeter didn't, and he stayed clean. Albert Pujols, I remember saying, you could count on me when everyone was going down with a sinking ship. And it's just a shame because there's other players like Jim Thome who should have been lauded maybe a lot higher because of his greatness. And there's someone that I think should be in the hall, Carlos Delgado. I always felt like he was a beast. And when you measure him against the steroid users, he looks very good. But then if you take out the steroid users and now they come back to the pack, Delgado actually looks extremely good, and it just shadows some of the people who weren't doing it and aged the way they should have. Like when Barry Bonds, sorry, Rick, we're using Barry Bonds as a whipping boy, but Barry Bonds.
I love Barry Bonds. Yeah, I still kind of do.
and I loved him before he hulked up. But it was just strange to see someone hulk up in their mid-30s and just outdo what they did in their 27, prime years. And that was the part where it's like, okay, this is just getting out of control. And that's
Rick's getting a little activated about that Barry Bonds statement.
Easy now. Sorry, Rick. But yeah. Hey, at least you got Buster Posey, who you get to say age the way everyone else does normally. But as far as like lumping them all in, if you had to ask me, man, I think integrity is the underlying factor, and if something's gonna mar baseball, they're just gonna put them in the same pot. And it's a shame you can't compare like steroid users who were just singly doing something in the game by themselves, but they did help their team win by, getting more out of their capabilities than they naturally could otherwise. And you can't take away those wins, even like with Houston, banging the trash can, like you're not taking away their World Series, you're not taking away the MVP from Altuve that year. It's something that I guess we just have to deal with. The one thing they could take away was the White Sox, the Black Sox stuff, and Pete Rose not getting in. But in the end, it's like a museum when it comes to the Hall of Fame museum. So it's not tied to MLB like that, but
they're in there anyway. There's, like part of the exhibit has like uniforms from the 1917 and 19 White Sox in there. And they talk about Pete Rose being the all-time hit king and have some like his stuff displayed there. So
Yeah, Scott.
and Barry Bonds bat and stuff. When I was there about 5 years ago. So
He's saying Beltran has suffered because of the trash can incident. He suffered. He's definitely a
Mhm.
Hall of Famer. That guy could do it all. And when he went to Houston in that trade and they couldn't get him out in the playoffs, he kept hitting home runs. That was amazing what Beltran did that year. He's another one. Um, so yeah, I think it's interesting when you try to break down errors and then try to single out the steroid users. You could go on for days about this debate, but that's what makes baseball so interesting. And then, White Sox now, how are you looking about them this year? Now that the season is started.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We have a new general manager, used to be our second baseman, about 15 years ago, which was a bold move by Reinsdorf, letting it go of Kenny Williams after all those years of him being there, and Rick Hahn. They were like lifers within the team, and Reinsdorf just doesn't let go of people in his inner circle very often. I got even in the basketball arena too with the Bulls management team. People are not usually let go; they're kind of retired into promotions, like John Paxson and stuff like that on the basketball side. Um, I don't know. I mean, like it looks like they're trying to acquire people to kind of help keep the other team from scoring as much as they were. So they're trying to improve their defense and pitching a little bit, which will make them competitive. But they still have a lot of guys that are those three outcome players at the plate: strikeout, home run, or walk. And unfortunately, the last couple of years they weren't very good at doing the home run or the walks. They were excellent at doing the strikeouts. So they weren't doing much at the plate, where it's creating a lot of opportunities that put pressure on the defense. So I'm a little skeptical about how well they're going to rebound this year. But I've actually been really pleased seeing the improvements of Luis Robert. I think he's actually going to be a pretty legit player in the league going forward. I think he proved it last season, but I think it wasn't noticed as much because the White Sox were just so bad. I mean, they lost 101 games, and after they did it like back in like the 70s. They lost over 100 games and hadn't done it through my lifetime. And they've lost like 100 games like twice now in the last like 5 years or something like that. I'm just like, oh my God. I don't know. We'll always be Chicago's second team, and I'm prepared and accept that, but we can do a better job.
Yeah. One thing I find interesting, I guess, seeing last year how the change of the base size and then how often you could throw over, how stealing bases actually became fashionable once again, where people got away from that and they just wanted to get into launch angles and no one steal bases because then they're going to walk the bopper. But now you see Acuna stealing 75 bases last year, and how, he was a 40-40 man, 40-70 or whatever you want to call
Yep.
it. I love it. I love it because I grew up in an era where Ricky Henderson was running roughshod around the league, driving pitchers crazy. And I'm a Yankees fan, so I was, fortunate to see him at games doing his little antics and driving the pitchers crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
now, you move forward. You got Vince Coleman, Tim Raines, on to, Juan Pierre, Ichiro, players of that ilk. And not to see it celebrated as much because of launch angles was like so frustrating to me. That and averages, where 260 is considered a good hitter, which is blasphemy back in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean,
So
Schwarber batted under 200. I'm not trying to pick on him, but like he had a year like you've never seen before, in some ways, because he never would have been able to get as many at bats in a previous era because he wasn't batting over 200.
I know. Look at Giancarlo Stanton. Like, I think he batted 190 last year.
No, yeah.
Pathetic, and he's getting paid so much money. It's just crazy. But I'm happy to see that stealing bases is becoming fashionable again, and maybe batting averages might become fashionable again at some time. I miss Rob Carew and Wade Boggs and Tony Gwynn type hitters where they just refuse to strike out.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would like to see pitchers pitch past the fifth inning again, but
Oh,
I think that era might be dead. But I've talked about this, I think, with some of my friends too. Like, you used to, like, when I was a kid, you tuned in to see the matchup, right?
right,
Like, you heard that Pedro was pitching against Randy Johnson. That was a much watched game. Now
right,
it's not like, okay, they're only going to pitch into the fifth inning where they might not even figure in the decision. So
right,
I don't
right.
need to tune in for the pitcher.
And then what kills me is the guy's got a no hitter going for 5 innings, and they take him out with 82 pitches, just because normally he starts getting slapped around after 5 innings. He's pitching a no hitter. How are you taking this guy out? And it's just all about analytics. That's another thing that drives me crazy.
All
Um,
right, so Rick's got a question from you. Who's the greatest White Sox post-war player? Which war? World War One or World War Two? Because if it's World War One, I have two players I can give you there that are the two greatest White Sox players of all time. If it's after World War Two, it's just one.
Hugo's saying it's Frank Thomas. So is Dre, Big Hurt. Yep.
Yeah, if it's after World War One, it's Luke Appling and Frank Thomas are the best White Sox players of all time,
Luke
hands
App,
down, hands
Frank
down.
Thomas.
Yeah.
No for Ventura.
No, it was great, but no, he was the best third baseman I think that I saw. So yeah.
How about Pierzynski? No on him.
AJ, he was fun. Yeah, he's not even our best catcher. Yeah, but yeah, we have two Hall of Fame catchers in our history. So
So
Fisk and Ray Schalk.
So Luis Robert is your boy now. That's your favorite
Yeah,
guy.
I mean, I guess he's our best player right now. As far as like active players, I don't know if I really have like one that I'm like, this is my favorite active player right now.
Uh,
The last favorite player I had just retired a couple of seasons ago. That was Albert Pujols. So I liked
uh,
him a lot. But a lot of players I do root for. But I think the White Sox player I actually enjoy the most is Eloy Jimenez, but he's not like a great player. But
right. Man, everybody's got something
mhm.
to say. Look, even
Sammy
Pacetti.
Sosa. Sammy Sosa stunk with the White Sox, and Robbie knows that. So we traded him for George Bell because he was going to help us win a World Series, and he was okay in '93, and probably wasn't much part of the team thereafter. So
84 was a tough year because I remember in the American League, the Yankees and the White Sox were hot leading into September. And unfortunately, they went on strike. And it was a year, probably the
oh,
Expo.
94, yeah,
I said 84, right?
yeah.
94.
Mhm.
And it was a year that the Expos probably could have done damage. And they had a squad. That team had such a
Yep.
squad. Yeah, you were robbed of one in 84. How'd you feel after that strike?
Uh, I think I was hoping up to the very last minute that they would play. They would find some way to do it. And I think locally, we felt like we were going to win the World Series that year because felt like we were improving from the previous year. There was no guarantees that we were going to do that. And I think probably Montreal was the best team in baseball, honestly. But you never know what's going to happen once you get in the playoffs. Unfortunately, that team fell apart after that, and it took a few years for them to get back to being like competitive for playoff positions thereafter, even though they tried to add a few things here and there to do it, like Albert Bell. So that was kind of like the hard part of the legacy. And I think in particular, the White Sox fans took it out on the team hard too and didn't show up for a while because one of the owners that was most vocal during that was ours, Jerry Reinsdorf. So we were so mad at him. And I think that kind of made us stay a little bit away from the ballpark, even though I listened in a lot during the 95 season. Eventually finally went to a game towards the end of the year, and then I was kind of all back in. But
I got more names people are chiming in on. Chet Lemon, I see Bill Melton, Benny Minoso,
Bill Melton. Yeah.
Carlos Lee. What was Carlos Lee's name?
El Caballo. Yeah.
Caballo,
The
right.
horse. Yeah.
He was a beast. He was another
He
one
was.
that was a
Yeah.
beast.
I was at a game. It was an interleague game against the Cubs. and the White Sox had fallen behind, gave up the lead in the top of the ninth, and we loaded the bases in the bottom of the ninth. Carlos Lee came up, hit a grand slam. That was such a great feeling leaving the stadium that day, walking past all the Cub fans with their heads down, upset at their pitcher, and we were just on the cloud nine walking out of the stadium that night.
Is that your favorite moment for watching the White Sox live, I guess?
Watching them live. That might be it. Yeah, having gone to a game and watched it live. I certainly have gone to a lot of games, but I wasn't at like the World Series games, and I think the playoff games I went to in 2000, we lost both. So yeah, I think probably the games I went to live, that's like one that's like really kind of there in my mind. So.
If I had to choose one, it's definitely 95 division against Seattle. And my man, Don Mattingly, brings down the roof with a home run right after Ruben Sierra. And I get to say I saw Don Mattingly's last home run at Yankee Stadium live, and it brought down the roof. So that's my all-time favorite Yankee moment. I mean, even if I go to a World Series and see them win, I was a big time Don Mattingly fan, so that was up there as primo number one.
Some of my worst White Sox moments at live games were against your team. I was blowing games late. Usually it was somehow Bernie Williams or Derek Jeter getting a big hit to take the lead in like the eighth or something like that.
Well,
there's a lot of White Sox names going in the chat here, and I see a few that are pre-war and 20s and 30s, but guys, you got to do a little better. You got to give some of the guys from that era, because we have a ton of Hall of Famers during the 1910s and 20s and 30s.
Oh,
come on, bring them on, bring them on.
I gotta bring up his name, Yermin Mercedes.
Oh my God,
the Yerminator. What happened with
Yerminator? He and Tony didn't see eye to eye, and he never really kind of recovered thereafter. So.
Dude said, "I'm taking my ball and I'm going home." And he retired. I've never seen anything like that.
There we go, Eddie Collins. There you go. Yeah, he actually was really more with the White Sox more than he was with the Athletics. Yep.
Eddie Cocky Collins.
Al Simmons. Yep, there you go.
Oh,
Bucket Al. So.
Yeah. Good
now
name.
They're coming in. So
I know the historians. Look at Maglio Ordonez. How do we forget?
I saw Maglio in the minor leagues. We had a minor league team here. It's now a semi-pro team because it was one of the teams that got cut. But the White Sox Farm Club played against them, and I was able to go to the game, and I saw the young Maglio Ordonez, and I just thought he had a fun name. And a year later, he was with the big club. So yeah, that was fun.
How about Blackjack McDowell?
Yeah, someone mentioned that too. So here we go. Got Ted Lyons, Red Faber, Ed Welsh. So there we go. There's the historians coming out there.
Awesome. I love it. You see, we're a bunch of nerds here on YouTube. Uh-oh, we got this one. Jermaine Dye.
Hey, World Series MVP.
Yeah. How about Mark Burley? I got
fantastic.
That. No one said
fantastic.
That. Great pitcher.
He was mentioned earlier in the chat. Yeah, Mark Burley. There. Yeah.
I must have missed it. Ooh, Alex Fernandez. That's a good one. No one mentioned that one. Now I'm trying to think of all.
Yes, Luis Aparicio. Yeah.
Yeah, Doc White.
Doc White. Yep.
Luis Aparicio.
I did 2 summers ago. I did like the 25 greatest White Sox players. And
oh yeah.
So a lot of these are names that were on the list. So.
Nice. I did the Yankees 50. Obviously, the Yankees have a lot of success, so there were a lot of names I could choose from.
Yep.
And I did the Yankees top 50. That was a little
fun. Was a good one. Yep. Him, Gary Peters. Yep.
I've been doing a lot of research.
Gary Pierce.
Some of these names I remember from the 52 top set when I researched them. Like
I got the Lawler and the Billy Pierce actually over here somewhere. Nearby. Up there they are. Yeah. There's the Sherman Lawler.
Nice. Let me see that again.
And the Billy Pierce. Yeah, I got these in the fall. So
nice.
Pretty inexpensive. I think they're awesome. So
one thing we didn't get into was the set building. Um, when you get into set building, how challenging is it? How many sets do you get into? I know you're doing a 36 Diamond Stars, but you do
Yeah,
a lot of others and you do the
I
spotlight.
do. Yeah, I usually have a couple that I'm going on at once, so I can kind of move back around, back and forth. The current ones I'm currently working on are the Diamond Stars, is the oldest one I'm doing right now. 48 Bowman, and I only need like 13 more cards for that one. 53 Bowman, I have 95 cards, so I need 65 more for that. I just did the 64 Giants. I finished that in the fall. The 54 Tops Giants, or 64 Tops Giants. And I'm also doing the 2001 Tops Gold Parallels, but I'm not doing the whole set. I'm just doing the stars and the Hall of Famers. That was hard because I couldn't do just Hall of Famers, because then I'd have to leave out some of these steroid era players that I actually was fans of during the era. So I did that. I couldn't include A-Rod. I couldn't include Manny. I couldn't include Paul Vero. I couldn't include Bonds. Couldn't include Clemens. So I decided to extend it to just the stars in general too. So I'm almost done with that. I'm missing just one more Hall of Fame card, and it's actually your boy Ricky Henderson. He's got a highlight card in there. I haven't been able to pick that one up yet, so it hasn't gone to auction in a while. So
Nice. Orlando's asking, how am I doing with the 52 set? I think I'm 150 players deep with that set, and I just
wow,
won last night Clyde King autograph version for like $12. So that was like a big steal, centered and everything. You could probably look at latest sales of Clyde King 52 and you'll see it up. So I can't wait till I get that one in. It'll be the first autograph version in the set. I couldn't pass that one up. So yeah, I was happy and stoked and elated when I found and won that one. So it's still going. I'm not rushing. It's gonna be like a nice roast. I'm just gonna let it just marinate for a while and then cook for a while, and it's gonna be a great set when I work on it. So yeah. So what's the most challenging set that you worked on? Was it the 67 with all those high numbers?
yeah, the ones I completed. Yeah, it was the 67 set. That final series. I mean, like you ask like vintage set collectors for like do the 60s and 70s, like what's the hardest set to put together, and like outside of 52 tops of the tops run, it's always 67. It's always 67. So it's 52 and 67, 66 are usually the three hardest. That final series, like you're paying like 40, $50 for a common card sometimes in that final series, and it's not really common. It's just like so underprinted. And there's stories of those cards like not being released west of the Mississippi, and I don't know how much that's true, but they were not available everywhere, and they weren't available for very long, just because by the time they released them, it was football season. So like the store owners weren't asking for them. They still had like the previous series on their store shelves, so they weren't asking for those orders to be added. So Topps just didn't produce it.
Mm.
No, different reason why 52 is scarce, but they just didn't make them. So for that, so
So when you work on a set and you're coming down to the finish line and you need like that one hard card or two hard
Mhm.
cards, how frustrating is it to not be able to find it or having to decide to overpay for it? And then the second question would be, um, upon completing it, how depressing is it? Because now what? Or is it elation? I finally
Yeah,
completed
it
it.
was elation on 67 for sure. I think I shared it like on my channel shortly thereafter, but I took a little while before I decided what I wanted to build next, because it was a little bit exhausting, and it was expensive, and I knew 66 wasn't much better, and it was gonna if I kept going back that way, it was not gonna be it was gonna be a similar experience. Although they don't have like super expensive rookie cards in the final series like 67 did. So that's when I started, like, I wanted to get some of the cards from some of these other sets that I really like. So I kind of decided to do a hodgepodge of projects at that point thereafter. But as like kind of getting to your first part of the question, when I was doing 68, the last two cards I got were Mantle and Nolan Ryan, because at that time I just had a hard time justifying the cost. Like none of the other cards in this set cost me this much money. And I think that's why it took me a while to finally like finish that set where I felt comfortable actually parting with the money to pick up the Nolan Ryan rookie card and pick up the Mickey Mantle card. Whereas 67, I thought I kind of aggressively went after Sear and Carew when I was down to just the final series cards. Due in part, like one of it was celebrating like a personal achievement of mine. So decided to buy it to commemorate it. That was the Tom Seaver card. And a similar thing with Rod Carew. So I got those kind of out of the way.
Right. Yeah, it's better when you get the tough ones out the way, and then it's like, it's a downhill race after that. So I'm doing it the opposite with the 52. I'm filling out all the low numbers and getting 310 of them. And if I'm opportunistic, I'll grab the high numbers. But most of the time, they're just people want 200 or the bids go for 150 and the card looks like it's not even worth that much. It looks like a one or a beater. And I just keep letting all the high numbers keep going because I'm like, I'm not spending 150 for that piece of trash looking card.
Yeah, I can empathize with you on that. Yeah,
they're common players. Some of them only played one season. Like I just can't justify spending that money for them sometimes. But I think eventually what's going to happen is like I'll start picking up 2 or 3 with like $300. Let me try to pick up 3, and that'll be my year. 3 high numbers, and it'll just be like that, snail's pace.
Yeah, like just kind of knock off a few, like maybe target a Hall of Famer 1 year or something like that. I want to get the Campanella at some point, but that's like the only one. I'm like, I'd like to have that one at some point in my collection.
Campy's a tough one, man.
Just because I don't have the resources to kind of go after all of it either. But I would love to have all the Hall of Famers in the high numbers, but come on.
Right.
I have a mortgage to pay.
Okay, so you collect the sets. What do you like doing? Collecting the sets or picking up the singles of whatever players that
the sets by far and away. I just have always felt like when I get like a card from a really cool set, I'm like, it would look better, if I had more to go with it. It would look the best if I had all of the cards that would go with that. So there's always been that push to complete it in sort of within me, especially as I've kind of really committed to building the sets. Even as a kid, I would open up the cards and put them in numerical order. So it's like there was something always there, like within me, to do that. So, yeah.
For me,
and it presents well. Like kind of like like just having this alone isn't as cool as like having. Like right now I have 38 of them, but 38 of them on the table together. Then it looks cool.
Right. For me, I couldn't get over the common players when I'm rifling through the pages. It's just common page. Oh, there goes a Hall of Famer. Oh, there goes a star. Common page. So it's like a whole lot of fluff. But with the 52 set, I decided to research each and every player, and that brought those commons to life a little bit. Plus, 52 is so far removed that you don't hear much about these players. Sometimes I have to dig and dig and dig to find something on those players. And when I do, it could be something really interesting, like maybe not on the field, but they were a World War II vet and they won a Purple Heart, something crazy, not a Purple Heart, but, something where it was like, wow, that was pretty cool. And then I share that in my videos. So that keeps the commons a little interesting, but like for like a more, late vintage, like 67 or 72, sometimes I look at those commons and they just do nothing for me. It's just like, I don't know. I just can't get into them. But that's just me. Different strokes, different folks. I'm not saying
for sure. Yeah. 48 Bowman, I have a very similar experience with you, like just kind of reading like those players, because like almost every single one of them was in World War II in some capacity. There's a few that weren't, that were like too young to serve at that point, or were not able to be there for one reason or another, but almost every single one of them, which kind of makes it really interesting. It makes you think about like what their final career numbers could have been like if they hadn't missed those years, or they didn't have to wait to start their careers because they're doing military service. So.
Right. I think that's why I love collecting pre-war a little bit more, is because there's a big unknown with a lot of these players. And when you dig and research, it's like a whole new world gets opened up. And you start sometimes pinning players to certain teams that they did this, and they, formed alliances with these players and decided to defect and go there, or and it's just like this whole world starts opening up. So I think pre-war does that for me a little bit more, where it just sinks me, and it's like I start using my imagination more, because there's hardly any footage. You can't see it, so you just imagine it. And that's what I find cool about pre-war.
Makes you think of like the whole history of the Federal League, and like so much of that is just lost to time, and there's not a lot of like pictures around to go with it. I know the Cracker Jacks had some Federal League players in there, but it's kind of hard to find like affordable things from that era that you can just kind of pick up. And so that's kind of interesting, like learning about the attempt to attack the reserve clause back during that time by creating the third league.
33 Gaudy was mentioned. That's another one I wouldn't mind getting into, but then you have to own 4 Babe Ruths, and it's going to be incomplete unless you find that Nap
2
last.
Garricks too in that one, right? Am I right? I think there's 2 Garricks in it too, I think.
The 33, no,
just one.
There's 2 versions of the Garrick, and the Nap Lasway. You're going to pay a boatload for that one if you want to make it a complete set.
Right.
But the 33 Gaudi is a very fun one if you don't mind a challenge. Man, so I mean, what else can we touch on? I know we spoke a lot on the phone, and we said we're going to touch on this and that. And are we missing anything that we said we're going to bring up?
I think we hit a lot of it. It was fun touching on a lot of things.
Well,
I'm impressed at how many people stuck out through the entirety of the chat for this conversation. So.
Yeah, I'm happy so many people chimed in on the White Sox players. That was cool to see some of those names revisited. So I guess this is going to bring a wrap, a bow ribbon on this live stream. Mitchell, I'm going to say thank you for coming on, and I hope to scratch your back and go on live with you at some point in the future. And it's fun to share a spotlight with someone who treats baseball and the baseball cards as a historian, man. I love it. That's why I had to have you on.
Final question. You looking forward to Juan Soto and pinstripes this year?
Yes. It's
rhetorical question.
It's weird. I kind of don't mind having him because he's a lefty and we needed a lefty desperately, but I don't want him to block any of the future big names like Jason Dominguez, or they have another one, the 6'6" guy, Spence. I think his name is, I forgot his name already. He's like the next Judge. Dude hit a 470-foot bomb in the minors, and he's an outfielder. So I'm like, there's only 3 spots. Giancarlo, Judge, Jason Dominguez, Juan Soto, if he resigns. Like, I like baby bombers more than, signing players. So I'm happy, but kind of not happy. It's like when they signed Giambi. Giambi, someone I did not like when they got him. Oh, I did not like it. We were going to touch on Giambi too. Remember you told me something about him blocking Frank Thomas from a possible MVP?
Yeah, I think we can save that conversation for another day. But just, I guess the highlight was kind of going back to the 2000 MVP award, and Giambi was the first one, and he was using steroids at the time, and Frank Thomas was second. And just like, I was kind of mad at the time, and I got further mad when I found out that it was a deceitful victory. But when we looked at WAR, neither one of them had the highest WAR that season. I think it was Pedro Martinez actually had the highest WAR. So I guess, Pedro, I guess, should have won actually MVP, which I would have been okay with too.
Mookie's killing me. He's saying, I don't mind having him. Yankee fans are a rare breed. Dude, it's not that I don't mind having him. I don't like the narrative that the Yankees constantly buy championships. That's the part I don't like. That's why I didn't like Giambi. That's why I don't like when they traded for Roger Clemens. And it's just, I like the baby bombers. I like seeing it organically grow.
It works for Real Madrid. They don't mind that reputation. So
Well, we've been on for an hour and 20 minutes. So again, I want to thank you once again. I want to thank all the viewers that were watching and chimed in. Mitchell, any last words to the viewers?
have a great evening, everybody. Thanks for joining in. That was fun having the chat along with us. So a lot of familiar names there. So it's all great to see you guys.
On that note, happy hunting when it comes to cards. I want everyone to stay safe and be blessed. And we will see you on the next one. Bye. All right.